As the sun dipped below the horizon on March 9th, 1945, the skies over the Marianas Islands darkened, but the American airfields on Guam, Saipan, and Tinian were blazing with activity. Across these newly captured Japanese territories, ground crews prepared for what will become the most destructive air raid in human history. A total of 325 Boeing B-29 Superfortress bombers, the pride of American engineering, were being loaded for a mission unlike any other. This was not to be a high-altitude precision bombing. Instead, it would be a radical and controversial low-altitude incendiary raid targeting the heart of Tokyo's most densely populated civilian district. The man behind the operation, Major General Curtis LeMay, had just rewritten the rulebook on aerial warfare. Each aircraft carried 1,520 M69 incendiary bomblets packed into 46 cluster bombs, more than double the usual payload. These weapons, filled with napalm that burned at over 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, were designed not to destroy factories or rail yards, but to incinerate homes, ignite entire neighborhoods, and collapse a city through fire. The target, Tokyo Shitamachi District, home to over 750,000 civilians crammed into just 12 square miles. Here, traditional wooden homes were stacked side by side, with narrow alleyways and little infrastructure to prevent the spread of fire. This was not simply a tactical bombing. This was a calculated attempt to bring Japan to its knees through destruction from the sky. At 5:35 p.m., the first B-29 lifted off from Guam. Soon, the sky was filled with the thunder of Wright R-3350 engines. But these bombers were different. They flew alone, not in formation. They had been stripped of most of their defensive guns to accommodate the unprecedented bomb load. They would fly low, just 5,000 to 7,000 feet above Tokyo, well below their designed operational ceiling. Leading the force were Pathfinder aircraft that would mark the target with M47 napalm bombs. These fire markers would create a glowing X that could be seen for miles, guiding the rest of the bomber stream to the kill zone. The B-29 was a technological marvel, nearly 100 feet long, a wingspan of 141 feet, pressurized cabins, remote-controlled turrets, and capable of carrying 20,000 pounds of bombs across 1,600 miles. More than $3 billion have been invested in the program, more than even the Atomic Bombs Manhattan Project. American factories had delivered nearly 2,000 of these aircraft by March 1945, with more rolling out every day. Boeing's Wichita plant alone was producing more than 4 per day. This was the industrial might of the United States on full display. In contrast, Japan's air defenses were woefully inadequate. By early 1945, their Air Defense Command was fragmented and uncoordinated between the Army and Navy. Their primary night fighters, the Nakajima J-1 and Gecko and Kawasaki Ki-45 Toryu, were modified reconnaissance planes with limited firepower, poor radar capability, and undertrained pilots. Japan had only a few hundred operational night fighters for the entire home islands, many of which were grounded due to fuel shortages. On the ground, Tokyo had fewer than 500 anti-aircraft guns, most lacking radar support and relying on optical tracking, useless at night in bad weather or against hundreds of fast-moving bombers. Curtis LeMay had inherited a strategic bombing campaign that was failing. High-altitude bombing from 30,000 feet proved wildly inaccurate due to the powerful jet stream over Japan, scattering bombs miles off target. Cloud cover mechanical failures and primitive radar further reduced effectiveness. The solution, as LeMay saw it, was to abandon precision altogether. Incendiary bombs, dropped at low altitude and under cover darkness, would turn Tokyo's architecture, designed for peace and tradition, into fuel. The tactical overhaul was staggering in scope. LeMay removed nearly all defensive weapons from the B-29s except for tail guns. This allowed each aircraft to carry over 7 tons of incendiaries. Night flying minimized the already weak Japanese air response. By navigating via Loran radio signals, the bombers would arrive over Tokyo in a continuous stream rather than as a single massive wave, prolonging the city's suffering and overwhelming emergency services. March 9th's weather forecast, clear skies, dry conditions, and strong surface winds, promised optimal conditions for fire spread. But this was not merely an act of destruction. The selected district in Tokyo wasn't chosen randomly. Intelligence analysts had identified it as a hub for small-scale war production, workshops integrated into residential homes where families crafted aircraft parts, electronics, and precision instruments. Pre-war Japanese urban planning documents helped pinpoint infrastructure density. American scientists and engineers had already tested M69 bomblets on replica Japanese homes at Dugway Proving Ground in Utah, confirming that wooden Japanese architecture was catastrophically vulnerable to fire. Each M69 bomblet was a steel pipe filled with napalm and activated by a phosphorus charge that detonated seconds after impact. Dropped in bundles of 38 per cluster, and with 40 clusters per B-29, a single bomber could deliver over 1,500 fire-starting devices. The plan was simple. Create so many ignition points in such a small area that separate fires would converge into one massive, inescapable inferno. As the B-29s crossed the ocean, Mount Fuji became a beacon for navigation. At 10:30 p.m., air raid sirens began to wail across Tokyo, but few took cover. Previous raids had been ineffective, and Tokyoites had grown complacent. The city had only 18 reinforced air raid shelters, serving just 90,000 people. The rest of the population depended on shallow dugouts and wooden bunkers, useless against the kind of bombs now descending. At 12:08 a.m. on March 10th, the first Pathfinders dropped their napalm markers. Within minutes, the main force followed. From the ground, the bomblets looked like glinting raindrops falling through the firelight. Then, as the M69s hit, Tokyo erupted. Thousands of fires bloomed into a single, vast firestorm. Surface winds of 20 to 45 miles per hour whipped flames through the wooden cityscape. Superheated air created wind tunnels and fire vortexes, turning the city into a furnace. Streets melted. Water boiled in canals. Survivors later recalled how shoes fused asphalt, and buildings exploded as flames raced through paper walls. Fire brigades, hopelessly outmatched, abandoned their equipment and fled. Civilian firefighting groups, made up of women, teenagers, and the elderly, found themselves powerless. There was no safe direction to flee. In the Sumida district, 24-year-old Yoshiko Hashimoto fled with her infant. Her father pushed him into the river to escape the flames, a desperate act that saved her life but cost the lives of her parents and sister. Across eastern Tokyo, similar tragedies unfolded. Families were separated in the chaos. Fire shelters became ovens. Concrete buildings sometimes survived, but those inside died from smoke inhalation and heat. Entire blocks vanished in minutes. When the fires finally died down, Tokyo was unrecognizable. Estimates vary, but most historians agree that over 100,000 civilians died that night. More than were killed immediately in either Hiroshima or Nagasaki. 1 million people were left homeless. 15 square miles of Tokyo were reduced to ash. Nearly 270,000 buildings had been destroyed. The raid was, and remains, the deadliest single air raid in history. From a military standpoint, the operation was a stunning success. 14 B-29s were lost out of 325 launched. Some were down by flak or turbulence caused by the heat. American planners, initially skeptical, were convinced. General Arnold congratulated LeMay. "This shows your crews have the guts for anything." Within days, similar raids devastated Nagoya, Osaka, and Kobe. Only a temporary shortage of incendiary bombs slowed the campaign. The 21st Bomber Command immediately prioritized restocking. The damage went beyond buildings. Tokyo's small-scale war production network was obliterated. Thousands of skilled workers, machinists, and engineers perished. Entire cottage industries vanished. Survivors, traumatized and displaced, were unable to return to work. Factories in other parts of Japan felt the ripple effects. Civilian morale collapsed. Refugees brought stories of horror to other cities. Many simply stopped showing up to work, convinced that death from above was inevitable. The raid influenced more than military strategy. It reshaped ethical discourse. The legality of targeting a city filled with civilians has remained controversial ever since. The 1907 Hague Convention prohibited attacks on undefended cities, but Tokyo was defended, albeit poorly. LeMay later reflected on this, stating, "If I had lost the war, I would have been tried as a war criminal. But history was written by the victors, and no Allied commanders were ever prosecuted for area bombing." Survivors' stories were often overshadowed by the atomic bombings 5 months later. Yet the trauma they endured was just as real. Children lost entire families. Generations of memories were erased. Temples, schools, and hospitals vanished in a single night. The psychological toll lingered for decades. Many survivors experienced long-term PTSD, respiratory illnesses, and economic hardship. The destruction of extended families disrupted the very social fabric of working-class Tokyo. Strategically, Operation Meetinghouse contributed significantly to Japan's eventual surrender. The systematic destruction of 66 cities by mid-1945 convinced many Japanese leaders that resistance was futile. LeMay believed incendiary bombing alone could compel surrender, avoiding the need for a bloody land invasion. President Truman, aware of the staggering civilian casualties already caused by conventional bombing, viewed the atomic bomb as a way to end the war quickly, an escalation in a campaign already beyond comprehension. In retrospect, Operation Meetinghouse was both a military success and a humanitarian catastrophe. It exemplified the devastating power of modern warfare when waged without constraint. The statistics: 1,665 tons of bombs, 267,000 structures destroyed, 100,000 dead, 1 million homeless, only hint at the human cost. Behind every number was a life, a family, a story forever altered. The firebombing of Tokyo remains a sobering reminder of war's destructive capability when industrial power is fused with total war doctrine. Though overshadowed by nuclear weapons, its legacy lives on in survivor testimonies, in international law debates, and in the haunting lessons it offers future generations.